Welcome back. So in the previous session, we talked about dinosaurs. In this session, we'll talk about something slightly different. Where the different races come from. So in the first session, in my introduction, you noticed that I actually did my science degrees in Australia. And I was in Brisbane, and this is what it looks like. So I was there for 4 years, and when I was there, I was actively involved with an open air street preaching ministry. So every Saturday, as far as I'm able to, I'll be on the streets for 3 hours sharing the gospel. And every week in those 4 years I was out there, I would always have one person asking me a question about creation or evolution. And I remember just one incident that was kind of funny, because I had this guy who came up to me, and I do not know what I should call him, whether it was a white supremacist or a Chinese supremacist, because this was a Caucasian guy who came up to me. He was arguing, he was saying that the Chinese are superior to Caucasians. And it was funny because this guy was saying that the Chinese, on average, our brain capacity, our brains is slightly bigger than Caucasians. Therefore, the Chinese are superior. And here I was trying to say that I'm not superior, we are equal, we're all made in the image of God. So it was a really funny scene where we're arguing with one another. I'm saying we're not superior, and he's saying I'm superior over here. But you're going to see in a moment's time, where did he get this idea that brain size means that the Chinese are superior? We'll come to that in a while. But before we do that, let's talk about where does this idea that some races are more superior than others, where did that come from? I'll talk about history. But before I do that, let's look at the museum today. This is the Smithsonian. You notice, I'm sure we have all seen pictures like this, the ape parade, where ape-like creature is proceeding on its way to become modern man. Of course, no modern evolutionists believe today. They believe that it's kind of evolved and spread out like a web. But this image sticks in people's mind. And when they came up, we wrote an article about this, where we talk about how, hey, you notice something? They always draw these ape-like creatures as dark skin, becoming a white-skinned man. And people wrote in, evolutionists complain, say, oh no, that's not the case. This is just not dark skin, it's just the fur that makes it black. Oh well, let's look at the Smithsonian Museum. Let's see what they have on their website. You see that? You know, there's actually two groups. There's one group that's completely ape, and the other group that's completely humans. Every individual that you see here, Homo heidelbergensis, Homo erectus, Homo floresiensis, and Hobbit, Homo tells you it's human. Every single one of this is human. Just different people groups. But look at the way they reconstruct the bones. Is it just dark fur? It's dark skin. Why do they have this? All this dark skin, is that preserved in the bones that we find? No, but this fits the stereotype that most people have. So it's not just dark fur. They are going to portray all these humans, which they believe are less evolved as dark-skinned human beings. Does anybody want to guess who this is? What species of human is this? Well, that's actually my boss. You see, he gave me permission to use it, of course. But you can go to the Smithsonian and they have a computer that will morph your face. If it is dark skin, it makes you look like one of these so-called Disney things. So to really understand where this racism comes from, we need to understand evolutionary history. You see, the 19th century, early 19th centuries, major cities around the world, in Europe, in the United States, we have what we call human zoos. And what are these? These are places where they put people of different races as exhibits around the world. And we have that in New York, in Chicago, Missouri. And by races, when I say races, different people races, I'm just talking about different people groups. But when evolutionists talk about races of people, they're talking about different species of humans. And these human zoos were once regarded as living laboratories to study the evolution of human races from all over the world in one single place. And one famous candidate is this guy called Otto Wenger. So who's Otto Wenger? You can see in 1904, he was placed in the St. Louis Zoo, Missouri. It's a pygmy from Congo. And it's not that short, right? I'm not very tall myself. And Otto Wenger would stand beside me, he would just be along here. Okay, it's dark skin, but you can't really tell from this picture, it's not really that dark. And he was placed in what we call the anthropology wing. They call him a savage. And he was there in one of the exhibits to promote to the public the idea of human evolution. You see, they used to think that different races of men are different stages of human evolution. Again, later, 2 years later, he was placed in the Bronx Zoo. Here you can actually see him with a chimpanzee. But in his exhibit in the zoo, he would normally be placed with an orangutan. And he was called the African pygmy. He was given the nickname, the missing link, and placed in a part of the zoo known as ancient ancestors of men. So Otabaga was placed in this cage to teach people about evolution. Not many people are aware of this, but when Otabaga was there, it was actually owned by 4 of the leading evolutionists of his time. Because in those days, if you're an evolutionist, you believe in different races, some being more evolved than others. His first owner was the explorer that took him back. Very racist guy, Samuel Verner. In fact, in his the autobiography of Otabaga, we actually read about how this guy was actually horrified on the ship that came back from Africa to Europe. It was a missionary ship, and they allowed Africans to meet with Caucasians, and this guy was horrified to learn about that. The second guy who owned Otabaga was this guy called William McGee, very well-known evolutionist. He wrote this book, The Trend of Human Progress, where he saw each race as a different stage of human evolution. The third guy, William Temple Holliday, one of the leading evolutionists of his time, and was the director of the zoo. He described Otabaga as a genuine African pygmy belonging to the sub-race, often discovered in dwarfs. And finally, we have Manson Grant, the founder of the zoo. Again, a leading racist of his time. He wrote a book that was called The Passing of the Great Race. And this book was Hitler's favorite book. Hitler called this his Bible. And in this book, he talked about how we need to exercise a vicious system of selection through the elimination of those who are weak or unfit. Does that sound familiar, like something that happened in the last century? See, it was actually American scientists, evolutionists, who influenced the German counterparts. 2 years after he wrote this book, Hitler came to power, and we know the rest. So we have two very contrasting worldviews. On one side, you have the evolutionists who are saying the evolution proves that one race is superior to another. And on the other side, you have the Christians that are saying that we are all equal, all made in the image of God. And here you have the New York Times, and here this reporter is kind of criticizing Christians who say that we are all equal. He says if the pygmies are very low in the human scale, the idea that men are all very much alike except for getting an education out of books is now far out of date. What is he saying? Say you Christians, you believe that we are all made equal in the image of God? Say you guys are unscientific, you guys are out of date. Science and evolution today tells us that these are different stages of human evolution. You see that? And Otabaga, when he was in the zoo, it was Christian leaders that stood up against it. They said, hey, these are human beings, these are not subhumans. If you want to know the sad story, Otabaga, after many years, because he was not allowed to live, he stole a gun from somebody and he killed himself. That's Otabaga. At the end of the day, some of these human zoo exhibits, they were finally removed because Christian leaders protest against this evolutionary beliefs. These zoos are all over the world, thousands of individuals, but we do not get to hear much about that today. Here's another one, this is Abraham. This guy, he's an Inuit, right? He's actually a Christian because he was converted by missionaries. Very intelligent guy, he could speak multiple languages, he could write and draw well. He's described as very hardworking. In fact, he played the violin for his church. And the only reason why we know what he went through was because he wrote a diary and tells us everything. So just imagine the guy in your church playing the violin or playing the piano. You take him and throw him in the zoo just because it's a different race. Because according to evolution, he's inferior. See, they were placed there to showcase inferior stages of human evolution. Many of them. Here's another one from the St. Louis World Fair. You see they put different people in their so-called habitats, displays. Some pygmies all around USA. Europe. But it's not just here, because in Australia, we see something similar. Australian Aborigines used to be murdered to obtain species for science. They were killed to be displayed in museums. Why? Because they were regarded as subhumans. 10,000 dead bodies of Australian Aborigines were actually sent to British museums as missing goods. The Smithsonian Museum here in the United States, they have the remains of 15,000 individuals of different races. In some museums, they actually have pamphlets that tell people how to kill Aboriginal Australians, and how to pluck up the bullet wounds, how to boil down the bones, and so on. So missionary account tells us of how Aboriginal men and women and children, they were murdered, the skulls were boiled down, and then sold overseas to collectors. Why? Because they regarded death as less evolved, therefore less human. Ideas have consequences. So Charles Darwin is famous for his very first book, The Origin of Species. But does anybody know what's the title, the full title of his book? It's actually The Origin of Species by means of natural selection, or the preservation of favored races in the struggle for life. The thing is this, Charles Darwin was very racist, but in this first book, he really did not write much about racism. But by the time he wrote his second book, The Descent of Man, that's where he talked about human evolution from the ape-like creatures, he was a convinced racist. And he was convinced that other races are less evolved and could not be civilized. He said the civilized races of man will almost certainly exterminate and replace the savage races throughout the world. What he's talking about, mutation will replace all other races. Here you have a well-known historian of Charles Darwin. He says this, by the time he, that is Darwin, writes The Descent of Man, 1871, it's pretty clear that Darwin believed the non-white races simply do not have the capacity to be elevated properly to civilized human beings. They are mentally and morally at a more limited level. In a sense, they are stuck at an earlier stage in the biological evolution of the human species. That's why one of the leading Christian preachers of last century says this: the origin of species, I suppose, has been more responsible for undermining people's faith and belief in the scriptures and the God's way of salvation than any other books. See, Charles Darwin in his day, he had a very strong supporter, Thomas Huxley. He was such a strong supporter that he was given the name Darwin's Bulldog. And Thomas Huxley said this: no rational man cognizant of the facts believe that the average Negro is the equal, still less superior, of the white man. A few years later, in Germany, Ernest Haeckel, another well-known defender of Darwin, if that was Darwin's Bulldog, Ernest Haeckel was given the nickname Darwin's Doberman. And in his book, he wrote about how there are 12 species of humans, 12 species, which can be subdivided into 36 different races. Ernest Haeckel was very much responsible for turning Germany into an evolution-believing country. I want you to know something, that racism was at its peak in the last century because of evolutionary teaching. I want you to notice something else. Evolutionary teaching has always been changing over every few decades. So I'm taking you through history, right? So now we are early in Darwinian history. Let's go to the United States. This is actually the textbook, A Civil Biology. This was a textbook that was debated about in the famous Scopes trial. 1914, so now in the early 20th century. At the present time, there exists upon the earth 5 races or varieties of men, each very different from the other in instinct, social customs, and to an extent in structure. These are the Utopian or Negro type originating in Africa, the Malay or brown race from the islands of the Pacific, the American Indians, the Mongolian or yellow race, including natives of China, Japan, and the Eskimos. And finally, the highest race type of all, the Caucasian, represented by the civilized white inhabitants of Europe and America. So this was the textbook, all in the name of science and evolution. It continues, it is not unfair to ask if the health and figure of future generations of men and women on the earth may be improved by applying to them the law of selection. Humanity will not allow this, but we do have the remedy of separating the sexes in asylums and other places, and in various ways preventing intermarriage and possibility of perpetuating such a low and degenerate race. Remedies of this sort have been tried successfully in Europe and are now meeting with success in this country. Does that sound familiar? Let's go forward a few years later. Now 10 years after that, the evolutionary teaching changed again, but still the same idea. The three fundamental human types, the whites, the yellow, and the blacks, related respectively to the chimpanzee, the orang, or the gorilla. So depending on your skin type, you came from a different ancestor. The intermixture of Mongolian blood with European, that means Oriental or Chinese blood, results in the production of idiots and imbeciles, which greatly resemble the orang and the Mongolian in physical traits. This special type of imbecile represents a revision to a type which is phylogenetically lower than the white man. There is here implied the inferiority of the yellow race. But the author is at pains to show that his imbecile have small skulls. How can we reconcile this with the fact that the yellow race have skulls as large, if not larger, than the Europeans? Remember at the start of this talk, I mentioned how I argued that Caucasian guy who said that the Chinese are superior. Where do you get the concept that we have bigger brains? From things like this. Of course, just because you have a bigger brain doesn't make you smarter. Because it's really the way that your brain architecture, the way it's wired, that makes a difference, not the brain size. But the point is here, see, evolution changes every few decades. Here again, we begin to see the four races coming from a different ancestor of man. This is again in 1964, the very well-known encyclopedia. Depending on your race, your different ancestors. And finally, 1 year later, we have the very first example of the human, the ape occurring, that you see over here. In the 1980s, the same thing, National Geographic. Notice something, all the candidates have changed. Everything that they once said was our ancestor has been thrown out and a new set has come in. But still the same picture. And finally, Smithsonian Museum today. Are you beginning to see where this whole idea of evolution and racism and how they are linked together? Interview the Ku Klux Klan, alright? Why do they believe what they believe? If you turn on the media today, you hear about Black Lives Matter. They pin racism on slavery. But is that really the case? David Duke, very well-known former Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan, he grew up as a Christian. Or a Christian background, rather. And his father tried to reconcile evolution and Christianity. But the more he read about evolution, he began to realize that he cannot reconcile that with the Bible. Because the Bible says we're all one race, all made in the image of God. All descendants of Adam and Eve. And so what happens is he begins to reject the Bible. And central to his belief is his idea, his belief in evolution and the great age of the earth. So why are they racist? Ask the Ku Klux Klan, they do not blame it on racism, on slavery. They blame it on what they believe about evolution. Of course, they think that's a good thing. So I will ask you to consider something, a paradigm shift. The Bible is very clear that American slavery that was practiced a few centuries ago, the Bible clearly condemns that. But slavery was not just in the United States. Slavery is a worldwide institution for thousands of years. It was very much because of the West that slavery began to be eradicated. The word slave actually comes from a people group in Europe, the Slav, who were once widely held in bondage to slavery. Alright? So, nations around the world used to believe in slavery. But slavery was actually abolished long before Charles Darwin wrote his very first book. Richard Dawkins, the famous atheist, said this: "I'm a passionate Darwinian when it comes to science, when it comes to explaining the world. But I'm a passionate anti-Darwinian when it comes to morality and politics." So what would a consistent Darwinian be when it Here we have Stephen Jay Gould, leading evolutionist, but he's strongly racist, and so he's strongly against racism. But he says this, he says biological arguments for racism may have been common before 1850, but it increased by orders of magnitude following the acceptance of evolutionary theory. The litany is familiar, cold, dispassionate, objective modern science shows us that the races can be ranked on a scale of superiority. If this offends Christian morality or sentimental belief in human unity, so be it. Science must be free, proclaiming pleasant truths. He's not a racist, but he says this, that science or evolution requires racism. And he also recognized that what evolution teaches about racism contradicts what the Bible teaches. So like I said earlier on, see, the Origin of Species was written in 1859. This is 26 years after slavery was already abolished. Charles Darwin's book was one generation after abolition. And his second book, The Descent of Man, when it was extremely racist, in 1871, that's 38 years after abolition in the British Empire, and 6 years after the 13th Amendment. Charles Darwin was extremely racist, but he was also strongly against slavery. That should tell you something. Slavery is not the justification for racism in the last century. It was evolutionary teaching. And this is important because if you identify the wrong justification for slavery, you're going to implement the wrong solution. Today when we turn on the news, what do we hear? Black Lives Matter, right? They talk about racism, critical race theory. So Black Lives Matter, where do they pin, who do they pin the blame on? Slavery, right? But if you begin to understand, slavery was at its peak in the last century, not because of slavery, sorry, racism was at its peak in the last century, not because of racism, but because of evolutionary theory. The entire Black Lives Matter narrative just goes out the window. What's the cost? So what's the solution? And today we read a lot about the cancel culture, right? You do not like history, you erase it. I do not agree with that. Why? Because history is there for a reason. It's there to teach us. Earlier on I talked about the human zoo, I talked about all these things. How many of us know about that? And if you do not know about it, why not? Cancel culture. In fact, if you do not like history, that's a good thing. Because then you will learn, you will not repeat from our mistakes. As Christians, we should not have a cancel culture. We should have a forgiveness culture. So here are some of the leading dictators and people from the last century that caused more death than any other people in the world. Do you know what they all share in common? Every single one of them named Charles Darwin as one of their favorite authors. In fact, many of them actually saw their actions as putting evolution into practice as a form of applied biology. Francis Galton, right? Eugenics. Charles Darwin's cousin. Margaret Sanger, Planned Parenthood, and all this. Charles Darwin wrote this. To believe that vaccination has preserved thousands who from a weak constitution formerly have succumbed to smallpox. This, allowing the weak to live, must be highly injurious to the race of man, excepting the case of man himself. Hardly anyone is so ignorant as to allow his worst animals to breed. What is he saying? He's saying that vaccination allows people who would otherwise die from the disease to survive. He says that is bad. Because once you wipe out the weak, improve the human race, so to speak. Francis Galton, husband of Charles Darwin, founded the eugenics movement. Many people know this, but what they do not know is that even after Francis Galton stepped down, 4 of Charles Darwin's sons took over. It was very much a family business. Of course, the founder of Planned Parenthood, Margaret Sanger, she wrote this: the brains of Australian Aborigines were only one set more involved with chimpanzees in just under blacks, Jews, and Italians. Sanger, in alliance with eugenics, and through initiatives such as the Negro Project, exploited black stereotypes in order to reduce the fertility of African Americans. She deliberately placed her clinics in black neighborhoods and people of what she regarded as other races. Why? She was a white supremacist. This was a bid to improve, to exalt the Caucasian race over other races, because she believed in evolution. And again, something that has been erased from the history is that in the last century, 27 states here in the United States have law that forbids mixed marriages. We actually have forced sterilization of 60,000 US citizens, even euthanasia, all in the name of evolution. Like I say, there's consequences to ideas. And of course, in World War II, Nazi propaganda films will always talk about how humans have transgressed the law of natural selection for many years. So what else do we say? In Nazi Germany, they used to create these places, and what's that? These are places where people, both men and women, who are not married, or wedlock, they can go there and produce children. If they are Caucasians, go there, or the Aryan race, go there and produce children out of wedlock, because they believe that would improve the human race. Terrible things, all in the name of evolution. But what about natural selection? When they talk about natural selection, people think natural selection was founded by Charles Darwin. It's evidence of evolution. So let's talk about natural selection. It turns out natural selection was actually founded one generation before Charles Darwin by Edward Blyth. Edward Blyth is a creationist. You see, if you believe in creation, you believe that God takes two of every kind of animal on board the ark, two wolf-like animals, then these creatures will have to diversify very rapidly after the flood to give us all the different dog-like animals that we have today. Natural selection is part of the creation model. And to understand about genetics, you need to understand about the DNA. So the DNA is the most complex storage information device in the whole mechanism. It stores information in a string of letters. It's so complex that if you take one pin of DNA, you stretch it end to end, it will reach from the Earth to the Moon 240 times. Okay, and that DNA is what codes for all life. It tells our body, our cells, what to make, what to do. So if you believe in evolution, this is what must account for. Must account for how DNA can come about by itself. So if you have one book of, for example, one book of instructions of DNA to code for amoeba, for one single cell creature, for this one cell to evolve into complex creatures, you need new biochemical processes to evolve for arms, for legs, for wings, and things like that. So you need more information. For evolution to happen, you need a mechanism that increases information. So how do we get more information? Richard Dawkins, the champion atheist, said this: it is a question that nobody except a creationist will ask. A real biologist finds that it's an easy answer. Sorry, it's an easy question to answer. The answer is that natural selection increases the information content of the genome all the time. That is what natural selection means. You see, right? And natural selection increases information. Let's take a look. Okay, pay attention because this is going to be helpful. So this simplifies natural selection, but it helps you to understand. So here we have two dogs. Right, so kids, you see this dog here, you have this thing in the stomach. This represents short fur gene. This, the one on the right that is furry, that represents long fur gene. So we know in genetics, we get one copy from our mom, one copy from our dad. So that's what you see here. So one short fur, one long fur, this dog has medium fur. So this dog falls in love with another medium fur dog. And they have kids. What kind of puppies will they have? Well, short fur from dad, short fur from mom will give you a short fur dog. Short fur and long fur, or long fur and short fur will give you medium fur dog, just like their parents. But what happens if you get long fur and long fur? get a fuzzy dog. Okay, so within one generation, we have 3 different types of dogs. Imagine you take all these dogs, you throw them in Alaska in the middle of winter. So who dies out? Short fur and medium fur dies out. After a few generations, all you have are the long fur dogs. When these 2 dogs fall in love and have kids, what kind of dogs will they have? All long fur dogs. So in 1 to 2 generations, you have an entirely new species of dogs, a new variation of dogs. But notice something, they have actually lost the information on the short fur gene. Adaptation has occurred, even speciation, but they have done that by losing information. That's the opposite of what you require for evolution. Remember, evolution is a mechanism to increase information, giving new complex biochemical processes. But the Bible tells us when God created all animals, He created them to reproduce after their own kind. So dogs will produce many different kinds of dogs, but after the dog kind. So genetics we know today, the wolf, the coyote, the domestic dog, the dingo, the jackal, all came from a wolf-like animal aboard the ark. The 39 species of cats today all came from a cat-like ancestor aboard the ark. So we saw in the previous session, liger, the lion liger. 39 species, all reproducing after their own kind. Natural selection and rapid speciation is part of what the Bible teaches. That is not evolution. That results from a loss of information. So earlier on, we talked about how the biblical kind will be somewhere between the family and the genus. And the modern varieties that we see today are just variations of the original created kind. So here's another example. Let's have some fun, alright? Does anybody want to guess what animal is this? This is a baby kama. So what's a kama? It's a cross between a camel and a llama. Alright, let's try one. There's a kama. What's this? A wolfin. It's a whale dolphin hybrid. A boar and pig hybrid. A buffalo, what's that? Buffalo cow hybrid. Liger, lion tiger. Grizzly bear. Anybody want to guess what's that? Polar bear and grizzly bear. We have a zonkey, zebras and donkey. A zorse, zebra and horse. And a jeep or jeep. That's a sheep and goat. You see, these hybrids tells you that these are from a different kind. The horse kind, and the whale kind, the cat kind, and so on. This is what the Bible actually says. In Genesis 15, it says this, "But, O Lord, how am I to know that I shall possess it?" And he said to him, "Bring me a heifer 3 years old, a female goat and a ram 3 years old, a turtle dove and a pigeon." This was a promise given to Abraham when Abraham was 75 years old. We know from the Bible that 420 years after the flood. Goat and ram, that's the same created kind. They have already diversified into different species in 400 years. Turtle dove and pigeon, that's the same kind, they can hybridize. They have diversified in 400 years. Indeed, right? The sheep and goat. Job, again, 300 to 400 years after the flood, who had let the wild donkey go free? Who has loosened the bonds of the swift donkey? Do you give the horse his mind? Do you clothe his neck with a mane? 400 years, the same kind. And again, diversified. Rapid speciation and diversification according to their kinds, just as the Bible says. The horse kind, the zorse, the donkey. Genesis 1. God created animals to reproduce after their own kind. Natural selection is part of the creation model, that's not evolution. But what about beneficial mutations? Doesn't that prove evolution? Doesn't that give us new information? Well, what's mutation? Mutations are just copy mistakes in your DNA. So imagine you have a book, you have a typo, right? That's a mutation. So we have all heard of beneficial mutations. And one example, for example, I'm sure you have read in the news, antibiotic-resistant bacteria. Is that evolution? Well, that's definitely beneficial, the beneficial mutation. But how does it work? Let's take a look. So here you have a normal bacteria swimming along, and put some antibiotic. So that's a toxin, right? It pumps toxin into the cell, through the cell wall. And dies. But now you have a mutant. You put in the toxin in there, antibiotic. And what happens? This time around, there's a mutation, so the cell wall, the pump, is now faulty. It's not able to pump the toxin to its body. And so it becomes resistant. Beneficial. But notice something. It results from a loss of information. The pump is now broken. Beneficial mutations do not provide the kind of information that's required for evolution. Still a loss. So Richard Dawkins earlier on in natural selection, but in another talk he talks about how mutation provides the information that's required for evolution. So here we ask him, can you give us an example of a mutation that increases information? And I want you to listen softly and tell me if you can hear what he actually says.
Professor Dawkins, can you give an example of a genetic mutation or an evolutionary process which can be seen to increase the information in the genome?
You hear his answer?
Yeah.
Okay, when they were doing this, he actually asked to go off camera and he came back half an hour later, gave an answer completely unrelated to the question. He never gave an example.
Professor Dawkins.
If this is a champion of atheism, evolution cannot happen. You have Dr. John Sanford. John Sanford, of course, is a former professor at Cornell University and is the inventor of gene guide. So the gene guide, if I'm not familiar with that, if you're a farmer, you grow GMO food, you know that that's how they used to inject genes into genetically modified organisms. So he's the inventor of it. Dr. John Sanford now is a creationist, and he does a lot of research into creation, genetics. He says, I'm still not convinced that there is a single crystal clear example of a known mutation which ambiguously created information. There are certainly many mutations that have been described as beneficial, but most of these beneficial mutations have not created information, but rather destroyed it. So natural selection I've shown you fits the creation model very well. In fact, rapid speciation is what is required if you believe in the worldwide flood just a few thousand years ago. So if it fits in both the creation and evolution model, natural selection is not proof of evolution. But now I show you that evolution is not able to explain new mutations. Science is what the Bible says very well. Well, I'm sure some of you here, they talk about human and chimps in evolution, and I'm sure you have heard the claim. Who has heard the claim that humans are 98% similar to chimpanzees? Anyone? Some of you? Where did we get the numbers from? If we are just 2% difference, that is 60 million letters difference in our DNA. Evolutionists believe that the last common ancestor between chimps and humans is about 7 million years ago. That's not enough time for them. This figure, 2%, came from Dr. John Elquist. Dr. John Elquist is a close friend after that, but he passed away just a few years ago. John Elquist, at the time, he was an evolutionist. When he saw 98.5% similar, he realized that that gap was too big for evolution to explain. And so he began to look at it more, and he became a creationist. Now he rejects a number. And so how similar are we in terms of DNA? Chimps and humans are anywhere from 80 to 85% similar. There's no common ancestor. Genetics is clear about that. And when we look at the Y chromosome, what's a Y chromosome? Now that's something that every guy has, right? X and Y chromosome. When we look at the human Y chromosome and compare that with the chimpanzee Y chromosome, half of it is missing. We can't even compare. And the other half that's similar enough to compare is only 70% similar. There's no common ancestry. In contrast, all people groups today are only less than 0.2% different. So let's get back to that topic of racism. If we classify people according to the skin color, according to the outward appearance, what do we see? We put all these dark skinned people together. But when we look at the genetics, we have a very different picture. right? Outwardly look the same. But even though they're dark skinned, they're actually the furthest away from one another. Science tells us we're all one people group. We cannot just look at the morphology, the outward appearance, to talk about races. But the Bible is clear. And He made one man, from one man, every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth. So here's a historian. See, in earlier periods, one of the few persistent barriers to social Darwinist theory in Australia was the Christian doctrine that all human beings were of one blood. You want a solution to racism? It's not by blaming slavery. Well, slavery is a bad thing, but that's not the cause. We show it comes from evolutionary teaching in the last century. Slavery has always been there, but the justification for slavery really increased by orders of magnitude in the last century. But it's the gospel that's a solution to racism. So you say, how do you explain the different races then? Well, am I really yellow skinned? Are some of you guys black? Are you really red or white? Take a piece of paper and put it beside your skin. Are you really white? No, you're light brown, aren't you? Sometimes you're a bit pink. That's because of the blood that's under there. But we are all just different shades of brown. We're all the same color. And that color comes from melanin. And skin tone actually does provide a very slight survival advantage. So melanin, the color, makes you dark or light. It's there for a purpose. Melanin protects us from the destruction of folic acid. Right? So UV light from the sun destroys a certain type of vitamin B known as folic acid. And if you ladies, your babies, you know that they always test levels for your folic acid levels, because the lack of folic acid can lead to birth defects, anemia, and a range of different tropical diseases such as ulcers. So dark skin provides a slight survival advantage in the tropics when the sun is strong. At the same time, dark skin makes it hard for your body to produce enough vitamin D from the sun. So if you're very dark skin, you live in the cold polar region, you're very likely to suffer from the lack of vitamin D. Vitamin D is important for healthy bones. Lack of vitamin D is responsible for rickets and some cancers. So light skin will confer an advantage in some of these places. But that's not always the case, because our skin color really depends on the genes that we carry with us. So the Inuits, the people who are in the North Pole, they have dark skin, right, because they do not have the genes for light skin. But they make up for that by eating lots of seafood and fish to kind of give them the vitamin D that they need. See, the Bible tells us a very different picture, right? Skin color is just superficial. But the Bible tells us we are all descendants of Adam and Eve. We are all of one blood. And then there was a worldwide flood, and the flood results in Noah and his wife, his 3 sons, his 3 and the 3 wives. So 8 of them were born the ark, gave rise to all people groups today. And the Bible tells us about the Tower of Babel, when nations spread out according to languages, and God gave them confusing languages. So they spread out. If you have dark skin, when you marry among yourself, your population will all be dark skin. And light skin, you tend to have a population with light skin. That's how we get the different cultural groups that we see today. Just like that. We're all from one people group. Let's not judge a person just based on the amount of melanin he has. So earlier on we talked about natural selection. In Creation magazine we use this illustration. Apply that to skin color. We know from science that if Adam and Eve were medium brown color, within 1 generation we can get the lightest light to the darkest dark. In just 1 generation. In fact, 70% of the world population today have medium brown skin, medium brown eyes, and medium brown hair. In Creation magazine, we talk about this. 2-tone twins. Twins from the same parents. We know genetically that they are real, that these are both the father and the mother. But look at their kids. They're medium brown skin. Their kids have 2 tones in Creation magazine. 2-tone twins. One of the most read articles that we have. When they grow older, Cheryl and Kevin's father, black Jamaican, and the mother is white English. There's another one. The so-called skin color is very superficial. In fact, the so-called skin color accounts for just 0.012% of our genes. The difference is really just skin thing. You will actually find more genetic variation between human groups than between skin colors. Racial categories are often just based on small superficial features and traits. The outward appearance is a poor measure of ancestry. It actually makes more biochemical sense to group humans according to blood type rather than just skin shape alone. It's just culture and the people and the location that we live in. But you say to me, oh come on, I know you look different from me. I mean, you're Chinese, right? Look at your eyes, clearly different from me. How do you explain that? Like I said, the differences is just very minute. So here you have a Caucasian eye, you have the Asian eye here. Where you see something here, we have this what we call epidentic fold. And actually most babies are born with epidentic fold. Give you the Asian eye. And by the time they're 6 months, most babies lose this to get the Caucasian looking eye. Now of course Asians also have a fat layer under the eye here. And many Asians nowadays, they want a more Caucasian looking eye, they go to a plastic surgeon, they cut epidentic fold, and get a more Caucasian looking eye. Very little difference, very minute difference. So it's the fat layer, the epidentic fold, sometimes the bone structure, the eye orbit is slightly different. But it's very easy to explain from science. Here you have one of the guys who's involved with the Human Genome Project. It says a draft of the entire sequence of the human genome. The researchers had unanimously declared there is only one race, the human race. Do you remember at the very start, we showed the early 19th century, the evolutionists will say, you Christians, your science is wrong. Science says that we are all different stages of human evolution. The Christians at the time did not know genetics, but they trust the word of God. They protest against what they see as injustice, because the Bible says we are all one God. Today's science has caught up with the Bible. Now you speak to evolutionists today, they say, yeah, I'm an evolutionist, but I'm not a racist. Yeah, of course you're not, because that's what the genetics say today. But is that what you would expect from evolution? No, the science has caught up with the Bible. Here's another scientist. The concept of race from a genetic standpoint has been abolished. What else do we know from genetics? We see mitochondria DNA. What's that? Most of our cells in our body, we have the mitochondria, just the part of the body of the cell that produce energy. It's like a power plant. And the mitochondria, it has its own DNA. But mitochondrial DNA is only passed down from the mother, from the female line. So we can trace all of that back through the female line. The Y chromosome, guys have X and Y chromosome, is only passed down from father to the son. We can trace that all the way back. And we know from science that we come from one man and one woman. If the high mutation rate seen in some human pedigrees were used to calculate the age of our most recent female ancestor, she would have lived just 6,000 years ago, a date more consistent with biblical age than the evolutionary timescale for mitochondria. We know how much mutations that each new generation have. So each generation will accumulate about 100 to 300 more mutations. So my kids will have 100 to 300 more mutations than me. Using this low rate of mutation, to calculate that back, it fits with what the Bible says. If we have a genetic bottleneck because of the flood, what the Bible says, 6,000-year-old creation, we use 8 people, then bounce back after the Tower of Babel, fits very nicely. After the Tower of Babel, the 3 sons of Noah filled the earth. If we believe what the Bible says, 6,000-year-old creation, worldwide flood, Tower of Babel is spread out all over the earth just a few thousand years ago. There's no time and no possibility for racism. Science tells us today, all human beings belong to one race. We are all people made everywhere in the image of God. And that's the reason for the gospel, isn't it? The reason why the fact that we are all one, we are all related, we are all sons of Adam and Eve, is the reason why Jesus can come as the last Adam, as our kinsman redeemer, our blood relative, to pay the penalty for us, so that we can be saved, we can be reconciled back to God. Because there's a real historical Adam. So let's summarize what we have looked at during this talk. We look at history, the impact of Darwinism on racism, human zoo, and all that. We look at natural selection, we saw that's actually part of the biblical model. It was discovered by Edward Blyth one generation before Charles Darwin. Explains rapid speciation and adaptation after the flood. And we show that natural selection is not evolution. It's adaptation that comes about from losing information. And then we saw mutations. Both natural selection and mutations does not give us a type of information required for evolution. Even beneficial mutations are often a loss of information. Then we saw genetics. Human and chimps, what we know today tells us we could not have shared a common ancestor. We saw that the differences in people groups, skin color, eyes, all these unique features are very minor and easily explained. The Bible is true. There's only one human race. And science today, genetics today, confirms this. We are all made in the image of God. All descendants of Adam and Eve. Jesus came as our kinsman redeemer to redeem sinners to himself and to undo the curse that came in through the first man, Adam. That is the hope of every Christian. Again, I'd like to end off my talk. A few books you might want to consider if you're interested in this. So earlier on I mentioned the Creation magazine, where we talk about beautiful weights and things like that. But Answer's book have one more chapter, chapter 18, on where did the races come from. I do not have time to talk about human bones, Lucy, Homo naledi, erectus, and Neanderthals and all that. But this is the best book on the topic. I highly recommend this if you want to go deep in this topic. Lots of original research by Chris Luke and John Sanford. So this book is not produced by us, but we sell it because we believe it's very beneficial. It's the best that's out there. And here's a DVD that talks about some of that human evolution as well. If you want something different, I encourage you to check out this 3-hour documentary called Alien Intrusion. It was in the cinemas a while back and we won a few awards for this. So my boss, Gary Bates here, he actually he was awarded an honorary doctorate for his research on this. So we interview people who claim to be adopted by aliens, who come to Christ, and what happens. I'm not going to give away the story, but it ends with a very strong gospel message. So again, Creation Magazine, consider this before any other resource. I hope you enjoyed that, and I'll be here to answer any questions that you may have. And thank you for joining us today. Tomorrow I'll be speaking at the churches. I'll be talking about fossils, quick fossils. You see some of the fossils that are on display there, come and check it out for yourself. I'll be talking about that tomorrow as well. I'm talking about mouse and helens and video matching dating and things like that. So I hope to see you tomorrow, and thank you.